Of all the characters in the traditional telling of the Christmas story, the Magi, or the wise men, are by far the most exotic and mysterious. They have inspired art and music and literature, everything from the one we read in high school by O. Henry, The Gift of the Magi, to Giancarlo Menotti's operetta, Amal and the Night Visitors, to the T.S. Eliot poem, Journey of the Magi, and much more. We would never think of having a Christmas pageant without them, when they are often memorable for one reason or another. If you've ever had children in a Christmas pageant, or even attended a Christmas pageant, you know the pitfalls of being a wise man or a magi. Dropping your gifts, getting lost on the way into the sanctuary, or that sudden case of the giggles that you just can't stop on your way up the aisle. Our daughter still remembers being one of the 3 wise women here at McAllister Plymouth well over 20 years ago, proving once again that we were ahead of the curve even then. One writer referred to annual Christmas pageants as bathrobe dramas, particularly as immortalized in Barbara Robinson's classic Christmas story, The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, when the Herdman boys were the Magi and brought a baked ham with a big red bow on it for the baby Jesus. Even someone who's never read the narrative of Jesus' birth in the Gospel of Luke, or the story of the Magi in Matthew, it is still likely that they know something about them, either as wise men or 3 kings or the Magi. Still likely that they know about the star that they followed and the gifts that they brought of gold and frankincense and myrrh, which is kind of amazing since the only place they're mentioned is in the first 12 verses of chapter 2 of the book of Matthew. And the only thing we know about them from the scripture text is that they are wise men from the east who came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" Much of what we love about the story has come from the collective imaginations of writers and artists and composers. Were there 3 of them? Not according to Matthew. There are 3 gifts mentioned, gifts fit for a king, but no mention of only 3 visitors. Were they really named Caspar and Balthazar and Melchior? Not until much later. Did they arrive with legions of servants and camels laden with riches? We don't know, but imagining such wealth somehow adds to the story. The latest addition to the legend of the Magi appeared a few years ago with the translation of an early Christian writing known as the Revelation of the Magi, which was found in the Vatican Library and taken on as a dissertation topic by a professor of religious studies named Brent Landau. Dr. Landau is also an expert in ancient biblical languages, which is fortunate because it was written in Syriac, which is a dialect of Aramaic used by early Christians throughout the Middle East and Asia. Definitely not a language many people are fluent in these days. Landau suggests that it might have been written by some kind of religious community of Christian mystics. In Landau's words, it is complex, rich, and strange. It is a complex, rich, and strange narrative that purports to be the wise men's personal testimony about the birth of Jesus. He goes on, according to this writing, the Magi are mystical sages living at the eastern edge of the world, guarding an ancient prophecy about a coming star that will signify the birth of God in human form. Among the other fascinating things that come out of this text are that the Magi are described as coming from a land called Shir, located on the extreme east of the world at the shore of the great ocean, and referred to in other ancient texts as a place where silk comes from, suggesting that the references might be to China. In Syriac, the word magi means to pray in silence, not magician or astrologer. But perhaps the most startling thing is the detail about the Magi's star. When it finally appears, it descends from heaven and transforms into a small, luminous human being. Landau calls it a star child. Each of the Magi, and there were at least 12 of them according to this legend, saw the star child in a different form, with each vision representing a different time in the life of Christ. Now that may seem a little far-fetched, or that they may have been smoking too much frankincense, or drinking too much myrrh. But you have to appreciate the imaginative way that some early Christians engaged the story of the Magi to make it their own, just as we have done through Christmas pageants and songs and literature, all the things I mentioned earlier. Is it really any different than our making them kings and giving them names and personalities and putting words in their mouths? One reviewer reminds us that we continue to reimagine the significance of the Christmas story in a way that is meaningful to us. Thinking about our fascination with the story of the Magi, the editor of the Christian Century wrote this past week about Garrison Keillor's take on it in his book, Life Among the Lutherans. Keillor says, of all the characters in the Christmas story, they're the only ones who probably weren't Jewish, but rather Gentile. Keillor thinks the Magi may have been Lutherans because they brought myrrh, which everyone knows is a sort of casserole made from hamburger and macaroni. Before they departed on their long journey, says Keillor, the wife of one of the Magi probably said, "Here, take this myrrh. They'll be hungry. And make sure you bring back the dish." More traditional scholarship, certainly what most of us are familiar with, would have them as pagans or Gentiles, probably part of a priestly caste of Zoroastrians from Persia or Babylon or Arabia, which corresponds with Iran, Iraq, or Saudi Arabia today. We can concur with contemporary religious scholars who suggest that bringing in 3 visitors from the East tells us that even here, at the beginning of the story, Jesus is shattering religious tradition by bringing outsiders in. One commentator frames it this way. He says, it is a story of radical inclusivity that threatened and still threatens all who are invested in exclusivity of any kind, but particularly religious exclusivity. All of which leaves us a lot to think about, but not a lot to dream about or imagine. It was Albert Einstein who said the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. And hopefully it is that mystery, that wonder, that capacity to dream that we celebrate through the story of the Magi at Epiphany. If we think of the Magi as astrologers and stargazers, dreamers, readers of signs in the cosmos who followed a star until it stopped over the stable where Jesus was born, perhaps we can still hold on to a little of the mystery and the wonder. We have come to the 12th day of Christmas, the day of Epiphany. It's time to leave Bethlehem and start for home. If you haven't already dragged the Christmas tree out to the curb for recycling and put away the nativity set, you will probably get around to it this afternoon. The Magi are on their way, albeit by a different road, since they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod with their report of the visit to the manger. But home is the next stop for them, probably the last stop for them. And you have to wonder, has anything changed for them or for us? One pastor asks the question this way: after the shimmering splendor of the star's light and the wonder and mystery of having now at last peered into the center of their heart's desire, after all that, did it make a difference back home on the mundane Monday morning of taking out the garbage and changing the diapers and balancing the checkbook and paying the bills, attending meetings and driving the carpools and figuring out the taxes and calling on clients and visiting the dentist and planning the birthday party and all the 1,001 things that it takes just to live? What was life like for them afterwards? After the star in the cold light of day, did it all really matter? Did any of it really matter? Like the Magi going back to their own country, we go back to business as usual. Perhaps reluctantly, but we go back. In his Christmas oratorio for the time being, poet W.H. Auden describes it this way: well, so that is that. Now we must dismantle the tree, putting the decorations back into their cardboard boxes. Some have got broken, carrying them up to the attic. The holly and the mistletoe must be taken down and burnt, and the children got ready for school. There are enough leftovers to do, warmed up for the rest of the week. Once again, as in previous years, we have seen the actual vision and failed to do more than entertain it as an agreeable possibility. So it's back to the old world we left behind for just a bit on Christmas Eve, and perhaps that makes us weary. And yet the vision will not entirely go away. Auden concludes, to those who have seen the child, however dimly, however incredulously, the time being is, in a sense, the most trying time of all. For the time being, we will get ready to make the journey back to Bethlehem. While it's too far away to think about now, we will all be right back at the manger in less than a year. Are you able to stand here at the beginning of the journey and imagine what it's like? If we are to hold on to the mystery, the joy of wonder, and the capacity to dream, we will need to have our own dreams for the journey, in spite of how, as one commentator puts it, we tend to have insulated and isolated ourselves from wonder, from imagination, from mystery, because it is unmanageable, impractical, and finally useless. Last year was not a very good year for stargazing, I'll admit. Too many deaths, too much violence, too many children sold into slavery or prostitution, too many wars, too much hunger, too many still in refugee camps, too many still homeless and wandering and lost. But our world is no less violent, no less heartbreaking, no less threatening than the one into which the Christ child was born. If we had read just a few more verses of Matthew, we would have heard Rachel weeping for her children. Because if you remember, the story of the Magi, with all of its mystery and magic, continues with the account of the slaughter of the innocents, when Herod, enraged at having been tricked by the wise men, had every male child under the age of 2 in and around Bethlehem killed. It's a shocking and horrible end to the silent night of our Christmas. The world into which Jesus was born was a world of violence and jealousy, power struggles and injustice, fear and despair. The world into which Jesus is born again every Christmas is still a world of violence and jealousy and power struggles, injustice and fear and despair. Our Herods are just as evil and just as determined to break the world apart. But we are not, because through this child born in Bethlehem, God is determined to repair creation, and all of us along with it. All through Advent, as we lighted the Advent candles, we declared ourselves to be people of hope and joy and peace and love. On Christmas Eve, we read the words from the prophet Isaiah, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light." And listen again to the words from our call to worship this morning. "Arise, shine, for your light has come. Lift up your eyes and look around. Then you shall see and be radiant." That's what the Epiphany season is all about. We hear those beautiful words, the promises in the text from Isaiah, about a light breaking forth for all of us who know what it feels like to sit in darkness. And we hear the call to arise and become radiant in the light of God. So pack up your gold and your frankincense and your myrrh. Pack up your hopes and your dreams. Load up the camel. Don't spend so much time looking down at the road and worrying that you might fall in a pothole or wishing you were somewhere else. Imagine instead what it's like to be a stargazer and look up. Perhaps you will see and be radiant. And then you will understand the power and the joy of Epiphany. May God bless us with the light of the star and dreams for the journey. Amen.